Let's start with a dangerous question, one that most people are too afraid or too angry to ask. What if incels are right about some things? Not everything, not the misogyny, not the fatalism, not the nihilistic rage, but what if buried beneath all of that is something that needs to be heard, something that's uncomfortably true? Because here's the thing, when people are in pain, they reach for meaning, even if it's distorted, even if it's dangerous. They try to make sense of their suffering. And that's what a lot of the incel ideology is at its core. It's a way to explain rejection and invisibility and that aching question that so many carry, but only a few can say out loud. And that question is, why does no one want me? That question is not exclusive to incels. It actually haunts millions, but the incel community has created a vocabulary for this question. It's a flawed, brutal, and often toxic vocabulary, yes, but it's a vocabulary nonetheless. And that vocabulary, it resonates because some of it names real experiences, painful experiences, true experiences. Here's one of those truths. Modern dating is not a meritocracy. We like to pretend it is. We like to tell people that if they're kind, if they're respectful, if they're emotionally intelligent, then they'll be loved. That if they work on themselves, they'll find someone. But many incels have done all of that and they're still alone. Because attraction isn't just about character. It's more so about chemistry, about timing, about appearance, about social status, cultural norms, algorithms, proximity, and even privilege. And when someone lacks those things, especially appearance or status, they're often dismissed before they ever had a chance to show who they truly were. This is what many incels call the black pill. The idea that no matter how hard they try, the system is rigged against them. That women only want a select few men, and that desirability is distributed like wealth. It's concentrated at the top and it's scarce at the bottom. And while this belief gets dangerously exaggerated in some circles, its core insight is hard to ignore. And that is that desirability is not evenly distributed. That's not a comfortable truth, but it's real. The dating economy, especially online, it amplifies inequalities. And a small percentage of men receive the majority of female attention. And those who don't fit, they don't fit like the beauty norms or the socioeconomic factors. They often find themselves ignored and mocked. And it's easy to say, just be confident or put yourself out there until you've been rejected 100 times without any explanation, until your DMs go unanswered for a long spell, until you start to believe the silence says something more about your soul. And when society gaslights that pain, when it insists that dating is fair and that rejection is just bad luck, it doesn't solve anything. Instead, it deepens that wound. Because when you're suffering and no one names it, the people who do name it, no matter how flawed their framing is, will feel like they're the truth tellers. And that's what makes the incel ideology so sticky. It gives a story to the pain that one is experiencing and living. It gives it a reason. It assigns someone as a villain. And if you squint hard enough, it is a kind of community, isn't it? But that story, while containing shards of truth, is also laced with poison. You see, the pain is real, but the conclusions often are not. So if we want to build something better, if we want to rescue those who are stuck in cycles of bitterness, we can't start by dismissing everything that they believe. And instead we have to ask, what is it that they're getting right in the questions that they're asking, in the experiences that they're describing? What is it that they are seeing that the rest of us are too comfortable to confront? And most importantly, how do we separate valid grief from harmful ideologies without abandoning the people who are hurting the most? So I want to explore that just a little bit in this next segment here. I want to talk about that emotional ecosystem that breeds this kind of despair, and how it's more familiar than we might want to admit. Because the brutal truth is this: many of the feelings that drive the incel beliefs aren't unique to incels. They're just much louder, they're sharper, they're more persistent in that community because they've been ignored and dismissed and punished everywhere else. So I want to take that longing to be seen. And that's not a strange thing or an entitled desire. It's that desire to be seen, to be acknowledged, is one of the most universal human needs that there is. To be noticed. To actually matter to someone. To feel like you're chosen, not because you're flashy or not because you're impressive, but because someone saw something in you that made them want to stay. But for many incels, that experience never comes. Or if it does, it's so fleeting and rare that it feels like a fluke. So the absence of connection starts to feel like a kind of curse. And where there's a curse, we oftentimes go looking for a cause to that curse. That's where the distortion begins. Because the human brain would rather believe in a painful certainty than a chaotic unknown. It would rather say, it's because I'm ugly, than sit in the abyss of, maybe I'm just unlovable. It would rather say, it's women's fault, than sit with, I don't know why I've never been chosen. You see, that's not weakness. That's survival. And over time, that kind of survival starts to rot from the inside, and it turns into a comparison of sorts. And then it progresses into contempt. And as it continues down that trajectory, conspiracy starts coming in. And soon you're not just grieving your own pain. Instead, you're feeding off of the collective outrage of others who've been hurt in a similar way like you, who have banded together into a community to talk about that hurt. The forum becomes your therapist, and the memes become your gospel. And this ideology becomes, in a sense, a kind of armor that you don and put on. But all of this is wrapped around a wound that was never supposed to be weaponized. And so it might be helpful for us to actually spend some time naming that wound. This wound is the ache of unwitnessed grief. It's what happens when someone feels invisible for far too long. It's what happens when your loneliness is not met with empathy, but instead it's met with shame. And it's what happens when you try to reach out and the world laughs. Or worse, when the world pretends that you don't even exist. So many incels will tell you this. They'll say, it wasn't hatred that drove them to the ideology. Instead, it was an unbearable sense of feeling isolated, of being ostracized. And we do well if we listen to that response, because even outside of incel spaces, male loneliness is already at epidemic levels. More than a quarter of men who are under 30 don't have close friends. And that's not just sad, that's actually quite dangerous. It's dangerous because when men have no one that they can process their pain with, they will start building an entire worldview just to justify why they're hurt and why it is that no one cares or wants to get involved. And that's why it's so important that we recognize that incel beliefs didn't emerge in a vacuum. Instead, they came out of a world that trains boys to suppress their emotions, to equate their worth with performance, to in essence see rejection as a reflection of their inadequacy. And when those boys grow up, when they fail to thrive in a system that promised rewards for being good guys, they don't just feel betrayed, they feel broken, they feel lied to, they feel like life has been dishonest to them. And if you've ever felt that kind of betrayal, you know how quickly that can turn into bitterness. So what do we do? What can we do? I think we can start by remembering that some of the most harmful ideologies are malformed responses to legitimate suffering that we collectively can relate to. We don't have to accept the conclusions that others get to, but we must take the questions seriously, because the questions that are being asked in incel spaces aren't alien, they aren't unfamiliar, they aren't out of left field. They're very human questions, they're very human explorations. Like, why does no one want me? That's a legitimate question. Why does it feel like I'll always be alone forever? That is humanity crying out there. Why am I never the one that people choose? Can you relate? See, if those questions make you uncomfortable, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. These questions are challenging questions. They should make you feel uncomfortable because they are uncomfortable questions. In addition to being uncomfortable, though, they are also honest questions. And if we can't sit with honesty, even when it's messy, even when it's coming from a place of pain, then we'll never be able to help the people who are asking these questions. So let's start charting a way forward in this next little bit here. One where we're going to build on integrity and intimacy and this willingness to reach across the silence. I wanted us to talk about what a way forward could look like, because the point of this episode is not to excuse the hate, and it's not to glorify the hopelessness. Instead, it is to ask a deeper question, and that is, what happens if we ignore legitimate pain until the only ones who are naming it are the least equipped to deal and heal with it? That's the situation we're presently in. Incel ideology is full of dangerous ideas. There's no question about that. But you see, those ideas did not come from nowhere. Instead, they came from wounds that we can relate to. And wounds need care. Wounds don't need contempt. So how do we offer care without endorsing the hate. We start by returning to the two themes that I have grounded this entire series on. Two pillars that I lean on a daily basis, and that's integrity and intimacy. Integrity, just to quickly define it, is living in alignment with your values internally and your actions externally, especially even when it costs you. And for someone who's coming out of the incel despair, integrity might look something like this. It might look like refusing to reduce others to categories or ratings or stereotypes. It looks like taking responsibility for how your pain affects the people around you. Integrity for this community looks like choosing to treat people with dignity, even when you feel you've been undignified. And that's not an easy ask. That's, you see, when you've been overlooked or humiliated, the temptation to strike back is overwhelming. But retaliation is not going to heal. It might feel powerful for a moment, but what it does is it deepens that sense of wound. Because every time that you dehumanize someone else, what you're doing is you're chipping away at your own capacity for connection. So integrity says, integrity says, I will not let my pain make me cruel. It says, even if I've been hurt, I'm going to choose to live in a way that makes healing possible. Now, I also want to talk, in addition to integrity, about intimacy. And the way I love defining intimacy is intimacy. It's the practice, the courageous practice of letting yourself be known, mess and all. But how do you pursue intimacy when you've spent years hiding your heart? Well, the best way to do this is to start small. You risk a little bit of vulnerability in a friendship, and you work incrementally that way, expressing, you ask for help without shame. You admit what's really going on when someone asks, how are you doing? And when someone shows when someone shows you that they care, it's challenging, but it's a good practice to see, how can I receive this? You let yourself be comforted even when part of you thinks that you don't deserve it. Because here's what intimacy demands that the ideology of the incels does not. Intimacy demands honesty. The ideology gives you certainty. This is the way people are. Here's how they're going to operate. It gives you enemies. It gives you people that you can call the villains. It gives you a place to hide. Whereas intimacy gives you yourself back. Intimacy gives you yourself raw and flawed and still learning. And that's the version of you that can be loved. Not the curated mask, not the self-righteous victim, but the real you. So what does this path look like in practice? It looks like stepping away from forums that reward bitterness. It looks like muting voices that exploit pain for clicks. It looks like investing in spaces online or offline where curiosity is more valued than outrages. It also looks like developing friendships that aren't transactional. Friendships that are not based on shared grievances, but instead shared pathways of growth. And most of all, it looks like giving yourself permission to grieve without having to justify it with anger. You see, you can grieve being overlooked. You can grieve the years lost to loneliness. You can grieve the versions of yourself that you had to become just to survive. I can relate with that. But you don't have to stay there. You see, you can actually decide to build a new storyline, a new narrative, a new way of what your experience could be, one where your worth is not based on who wants you, but one where your dignity is tied to your sense of how you see yourself and not your desirability. One where your story doesn't end with rage, but instead with restoration. Because the truth is, many incels are right about some things. They're right about dating, that it is transactional in many scenarios. They're right that beauty standards are cruel. They're right that excuse me. They're right that loneliness is lethal, and that the world can be brutal to those who don't fit the mold. But those truths don't mean that the only response is hopelessness. They mean that we need better responses. We need more humane stories that we can relate to. We need more conversations that go deeper, and more people who are willing to sit with uncomfortable truths, even when turning them into weapons seems like a tempting option. So let me end here with this bridge. It's not a perfect bridge, but it is a bridge. It may not be finished, but it's a bridge that is made of real wood, real words, real possibility. A bridge that says, you are not your rejection. You are not your worst thoughts. You are not unlovable. My dear listener, you are not alone. You have been hurt, but you're still here. You've been silenced perhaps, but you still have a voice. And you've believed things that have protected you for a long time, but now it's time to live the things that can actually bring healing. This is not where your story ends. This is actually where your story starts again. Not in an ideology, but in integrity and in intimacy. And in the fragile, honest, beautiful work of being a human on purpose. That's the bridge back to us.